Farmers in the Netherlands are back on the streets. They're protesting against plans to shut down farms to reduce nitrogen emissions. Officials say the plan will reduce pollution. But what will this mean for the future of farming in the Netherlands and elsewhere? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Vinell. Agriculture accounts for nearly 27% of all greenhouse gas emissions that are harming our environment. And as the world tries to cut back on pollutants to save the planet, people's source of food could be affected. Soil and fertilisers release nitrogen, which has proven to be a much stronger cause for global warming than carbon dioxide. The excess gas often goes into waterways and contaminates drinking supplies. It's also released into the air, polluting skies and putting people's health at risk. The Netherlands is one of many nations that's been taking measures to reduce its nitrogen pollution, and a number of farms may have to be closed down. And that's angered many Dutch farmers who protested against the plan on Wednesday. We'll bring in our guests in just a moment, but first this report from Step Vassen in The Hague.
Farmers from all over the Netherlands have taken their tractors, also carrying signs, "We are fed up," here to the government center in The Hague. They're basically fighting for their survival. For a couple of years already, the government has announced that nitrogen emissions have to be significantly reduced, and they are caused by intense farming. So that would mean that farms will have to close down, cattle has to be reduced, and also possibly farms have to move elsewhere. Lots of questions about their future. So they want some answers from the government. What will happen to us? Environmental groups have said that the government is not even going far enough with their reductions. They actually suggest that more reductions, more cattle has to disappear. That has also angered farmers. So they really want some clear answers about their future. Lots of young people are here. They also want to know, can farms still exist in the Netherlands? Step Vassen, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's take a closer look at the impact of nitrogen pollution on the environment. Nitrogen is about 300 times more powerful than carbon dioxide at heating our atmosphere. And it stays a long time, spending an average of 114 years in the sky before breaking up and depleting the ozone layer. Scientists estimate nitrogen accounts for nearly 6% of all greenhouse gas emissions. A study conducted last year found nitrous oxide emissions rose by 30% in the last 4 decades. In 2018, UN experts concluded the world needs to cut the amount of nitrogen emissions in half to avoid disastrous consequences. All right, it's time to bring in our guests. In The Hague, we have Sjaak van der Tak, a former mayor of Westland in the Netherlands and chairman of the Netherlands Agricultural and Horticultural Association. In Amsterdam, we have Hilde de Vries, a campaigner for sustainable agriculture and biodiversity at Greenpeace Netherlands. And in Reading, UK, Richard Tiffin, a professor at the University of Reading and its former director of the Centre for Food Security. A very warm welcome to you all. Mr. Tiffin, I'd like to begin with you. We spoke earlier about the power of nitrogen in terms of being a pollutant. What happens to the world if we continue expelling nitrogen at the rate that we are now? What happens to the air, to the water, to biodiversity?
Well, the key thing here is that we're applying nitrogen to agricultural land, and what that does is it increases the rate of emissions of nitrous oxide. And nitrous oxide is one of the most polluting greenhouse gases that there is. So the first impact will be that we will continue to see global warming as a result of human activity. And then on top of that, we applying nitrogen to the soil can potentially affect the natural ecosystem, because the plants that we're growing outcompete the plants that are naturally resident in a particular area. And probably more importantly, it can start it has started to damage significantly, and will continue to do so, to damage the soil, which we use as the medium, obviously, for growing most of our crops.
Okay, so there is a lot at stake. I think it's important that we bear that in mind as we have this discussion. Hilde Anna de Vries, let's talk about the Netherlands. How much does livestock farming contribute to the nitrogen emissions if we look at the total coming out of the Netherlands?
Yeah, if we look at the Netherlands, livestock is actually the biggest source. It's responsible for about 65% of all the emissions that precipitate on our protected nature areas.
Okay, so it's pretty big. The Dutch plan is to curb nitrogen emissions by 40% by 2023 in areas that are currently being impacted by nitrogen pollution. Mr. Sjaak van der Tak, what are your thoughts on the Dutch plan to curb these emissions?
Well, let me say at first that we have in 30 years the pollution of nitrogen is increased with 68% down. And yes, let me say there are new norms, and in these new norms, what Hilde says, there are, computer systems who said that we are the greatest pollution and shower of all these things in the Netherlands. But our farmer said we can downsize these norms if we can have a system that we can measure at the cows outside the stables and inside the forest.
Okay, so I want to be clear. What you're saying is that the farmers are being unfairly targeted because actually pollution from nitrogen is down 67% in 30 years, and all we're dealing with is new norms. What do you make of that, Hilde Anna de Vries?
Well, unfortunately, our nature doesn't really care about norms because we've had such a huge number of animals in the Netherlands. Nature has been suffering for a long time. And as a result, our nature, most vulnerable protected areas, their specific nature that's already on a tipping point right now. And the problem here is that based on the EU Habitats Directive, we are obliged to protect nature from deteriorating. And because government has not adequately dealt with this issue years ago, which should have happened, now we're in a really, really difficult position, and the problem has actually become worse. So what we need now is for government to take the lead and drastically reduce nitrogen emissions to at least adhere to the legislation again, and to help farmers with an integral plan for a big transition of our agricultural system.
So what do you make of the current legislation and the current targets to reduce these emissions? Does it go far enough?
It doesn't go far enough, unfortunately. We had a very well-known ecologist calculate what the effects would be for the most vulnerable nature. And the conclusion actually is that it's not going to be enough. And for a legally feasible approach, you need long-term reduction goals, which show that you're going to achieve your natural goals in the long run. And you need to act as fast as possible. And then this is not only a nature crisis, but we're also having to achieve our climate goals. And the only integral solution here is to drastically reduce the number of animals and to help farmers to a more sustainable way of producing our food.
Okay, I want to come back to you, Mr. Sjaak van der Tak. There are, as we've seen, people out protesting. Farmers are concerned about their livelihoods. What are the concerns?
Well, they are frustrated because we have a plan with farmers, and all the NGOs, especially two, who said they don't want to support the farmers, like Greenpeace. The other organization said, okay, when the farmers are frustrated, let's work together. Let's cooperate and work together on a good plan. And we have a good plan just nowadays with the two natural organizations of the annual NGOs.
What's this good plan? What is this good plan, this acceptable plan? What does that plan look like?
We have a plan which doesn't just ensure 40% reduction. That's one. Second, it is cooperating with our farmers and the nature organizations and also the entrepreneurs organizations. And 3, let's do a system making with sensors inside the stable, outside the stable, and in the forest.
Okay, so you want different emissions targets for different parts of the farm and in the process. I can see you shaking your head there, Ms. Hilde de Vries. Can you tell me why?
Well, obviously, it's always good that there's, a negotiation and that a plan comes out that is more than the current legislation, because it actually, I think it supports our argument that the current legislation is not enough. However, like I said, we need to adhere to legal criteria, and this is simply not enough. We need to have a long-term plan which shows that, what we state, 90% emission reduction is necessary in order to achieve your long-term nature goals. And if you focus on very short-term reduction goals, even though 40% is an important step in between, A, it's not fast enough for the most vulnerable nature, and B, it focuses a lot on technological innovations, and there's a lot of questions about how effective these are. And secondly, if you're gonna put all these farmers that are already frustrated, which is something that we understand, through the whole process of remodeling all their stables, and then because the reduction goals need to be stricter afterwards, both for climate purposes and for nature purposes, we have to acknowledge that the number of animals needs to be reduced. So you're going to frustrate them afterwards as well if the conclusion has to be that we have to reduce the number of animals as well. So let's just work together on this and try and, create a plan, like a plan that we presented last year, where we can have as many farmers as possible that work within environmental boundaries.
Okay, I can see you shaking your head, Mr. Van der Tak. I'll come to you in a moment. Mr. Tiffin, you've been waiting patiently. I'm wanting to get your take on whether you think there are any areas which can be win-win, not just in the Netherlands, but around the world, where you have governments who want to reduce pollution from nitrogen, and you have farmers who are worried about their livelihoods and their ability to continue the output that they need in order to make a good living. Are there any areas which you can see more broadly that could be win-win?
Absolutely, I do. And I think, to respond to some of the comments that have been made earlier as well, I think there really need, there have to be two main forks to the policy agenda in this area. The first is to engage with farmers to achieve their cooperation. And what I mean by that is actually, farmers potentially are the best environmentalists that there are, because preserving the environment on the farm, preserving the condition of their soil, preserving biodiversity, is actually in the long-term interests of making sure that their land remains as productive as possible for the long term. But the danger there is, the problem is that the cycles that we're talking about are much longer than even the growing cycles that farmers have to deal with their conventional production. And what the consequence of that, the long growing cycles, is that the rewards are so far in the future that the farmer discounts them and doesn't and really doesn't have a good business reason for working towards those goals. And secondly, they're extremely risky. And farmers are notoriously risk-averse individuals in the way in which they make decisions. So the first part of the policy implementation needs to be, first of all, to bring some of those, to create an environment, to create a framework in which some of those future benefits that farmers will receive can be brought forward. And secondly, to create frameworks in which the risk that farmers would otherwise experience can be transferred to other sectors in the way in which we're used to transferring risk using insurance type products. So that's the first part of the policy. And then the second part of the policy has to be regulation. But the type of regulation that needs to be there has to also allow for a tradability in permits, if you like, for emissions, so that we don't necessarily constrain ourselves to a rigid production system that is defined by the regulation, but we create a situation in which is fluid and dynamic, so that emissions end up being allocated, if you like, to the most efficient, to where it is best for those emissions to be, both from an environmental and a business perspective.
Okay.
So I think there's those two twin.
Mr. Sjaak van der Tak, I want to bring you back in to get your take on what's been said. I also want to ask you, part of the Dutch plan is to buy out farms which are being seen as being pollutant. How is that being received from farmers, and how costly is it for farmers to reduce emissions on their existing farms?
Yeah, let me give you a clear answer. Some farmers don't like it. But let me say, the majority of the farmers are agreed with that plan. That's one. Secondly, what you said is how the pollution, falling down with these issues is one, innovation is very clearable, and there are farmed, a great farm in the Netherlands is Lely in Maasluis. And they have a wonderful plan of emission losing pollution in the stable. A good system. Secondly, some of them will be stopped because there are elder farmers. And third, when there are farmers who have a lot of pollution of nitrogen, then there is an opportunity to get them from the one place to another place. And that's why our farmers said, okay, I'm not agree with all these things, but it is a way to continue and to go make a step forward.
Ms. Hilde de Vries, I want to bring you back in. What about individual responsibility? I mean, we're talking about the livestock sector being a large pollutant. What if people just were encouraged to eat less meat or to, eat less dairy? Could that be a factor here?
Well, I think it both needs to happen, but the thing about the Netherlands is that we export almost 2/3 of all the meat and dairy that we produce here, and our country is left with all the manure and all the consequences for our nature and for climate. So it has to happen hand in hand. But if we look at, the biggest problem here is the production side. And at the same time, yes, Dutch people as well, they need to drastically reduce their consumption of meat and dairy. But we cannot just wait for consumption to go down, because that's also very complicated. If you look at marketing for meat, etc., it all has to happen at the same time, and it has to happen fast.
Mr. Sjaak van der Tak, I can see you want to jump in there. What did you want to add?
Well, let me say this. Why it is the wrong policy to export very good foods of products to other countries. Especially what we are doing is a lot of our goods, our healthy goods, are going to our neighbor, Germany. What's the point of that? And let me say, the population of the world is growing from 2040 and 2050 to 10 billion people. So what is wrong when the Netherlands feed that people?
Okay.
Nothing is wrong because it's healthy food.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Tiffin, I'd like to bring you in. If we were to extrapolate this out for a global audience, what are some of the biggest nitrogen polluters globally? What moves are being taken globally to try and reduce nitrogen pollution? And how might that impact food chains and food security?
Well, I think so the biggest polluters as far as nitrous oxides are concerned are China and India. We know that some of those countries are intervening to encourage better management of crops and livestock to make sure that nitrogen is being used more efficiently. The consequences for global food security are, as Sjaak says, are potentially serious. We have got a population on the planet that is growing massively. At the moment, large parts of the world are eating plant-based diets. It's probable that as incomes increase, and we're seeing this in China and India, that those parts of the world will probably increase their demand for meat and dairy products.
And what's that going to mean
So,
for our planet, for the health of our planet?
It's not good news, and as we've already talked about, you know, the livestock sector in particular is responsible for a lot of emissions of greenhouse gases. But it's not just the livestock sector. The arable sector also, when it's farmed intensively, emits a lot of nitrous oxide. So it's beholden, and you know, I firmly believe this, that it's beholden on those of us that live in developed countries to take more than our fair share of the burden in terms of correcting this challenge. Partly because we have the technology available to us to do that, but also because our levels of consumption are still significantly higher than they are in other parts of the world.
Hilde de Vries, Greenpeace recently sent a summons to the Dutch government. The first step, I guess, in legal action, and its nitrogen policies were a big part of that. Is that a PR stunt, or do you really think that you can hold the government to account and get some sort of change through legal action?
Well, the nitrogen crisis has actually affected the Dutch economy for a while already. A judge already ruled that the way we deal with permits for emissions is legally not feasible. So we've, of course, watched the development since. And what we see now is with the legal legislation that's trying to address the issue, that it's really not enough. So the only thing we're doing is showing government that they have a legal obligation to at least not let nature further deteriorate, which has been happening for years now. And we all as humans need nature. Farmers need nature as well. So we're just doing this out of concern for our future and the future of our children. So we're just trying to get the government to adhere to the bottom line of what is legally necessary.
Okay, Mr. Sjaak van der Tak, we're running out of time, but I want to come back to you. How do you foresee these protests playing out? Do you think that farmers are putting any real pressure on the government to change course?
Yes, we do have, may I say, good pressure on our government, because some NGOs like Greenpeace are, let me say, have some white places, white opportunities. Let me say, our farmers are the best in the world of efficiency. A lot of farmers can learn in the world from our farmers. Secondly, healthy food, like that, from dairy to, let me say, fruit and vegetables. Third, our entrepreneurs, like our farmers, will make a step to emission the nitrogen policy.
Just before we go,
can help each other.
Just before we go, I want to ask you, we're down to 1 minute. I want to ask you, do you accept that farming, intensive farming in the Netherlands is impacting negatively the environment through pollution from nitrogen?
No, I don't. No, I don't agree about that, because inside farming has sometimes very good standards, high standards of, let me say, reducing the emission policy.
Thank you very much for all of your time, Sjaak van der Tak, Hilde de Vries and Richard Tiffin. And thank you too for watching a very lively debate. You can see it again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. You can follow me @Kim Vinell. From me, Kim Vinell, and the entire team here at Inside Story. Bye-bye for now. See you next time.